Hello, today we're going to be talking about enriched doughs and I'm going to be showing you two different recipes that you can do using an enriched dough. The first is a hot cross bun and the second will be a Chelsea bun. To make hot cross buns you will need 200 grams of strong flour or bread flour or even very strong flour, 1 egg, 1 packet of yeast, 65 millilitres of milk, 25 grams of caster sugar. If you're measuring 25 grams, the quick way to do that is just to use a tablespoon. 25 grams of butter, a teaspoon of mixed spice, 25 grams of currants or raisins, and 25 grams of mixed peel. The equipment you will need is a mixing bowl, a measuring jug, a knife, a baking tray and paper, a cooling rack for later, a small saucepan and a small bowl with a spoon. First you're going to quickly chop up your butter and rub it in just like we've done in lots of different recipes before. It shouldn't take very long, it's only a small amount of butter that's being rubbed in. The only difference between an enriched dough and an ordinary bread dough is that it's been enriched with either an egg or some milk or extra fat. In this case, we're not using any extra fat. Things like a brioche dough, that's an enriched dough, that has a lot more butter in it. The enriched doughs that we're doing today have got egg and milk added to them. So it just makes a slightly richer flavoured bread dough, slightly softer and more luxurious. So just quickly rub the butter into the flour. Once you've rubbed your butter into your flour, you're going to stir in a packet of yeast and 25 grams of sugar. Next you can add a teaspoon of mixed spice, or a little more if you really like a spicy flavoured hot cross bun. You're going to need 25 grams of mixed peel. A tablespoon is a good way of measuring 25 grams. Another 25 grams of dried fruit. In this case I've got raisins, combination of raisins and sultanas. And then we're going to add, so that's all your dry ingredients together. Oh, I've just noticed, don't know if you can see that, but this little raisin has got a stalk on it. If you spot a raisin with a stalk, take the stalk out because you're not going to want that in your hot cross buns, that'd be hard. So that's the dry ingredients, just mix those together lightly with your table knife. And then we're going to add the wet ingredients, and in this case I've just warmed up some milk, 65 mils of milk, which isn't very much and it doesn't take very long to heat up. I've just literally given it 30 seconds in the microwave. You can warm it in a saucepan on the hob if you prefer. And into my warmed milk I'm going to add an egg. Which I'm just going to whisk together lightly. So the liquids are going to be on our enriching our dough. I think I just threw that on the floor. Never mind. Whenever you're making a dough of any sort, never add all of your liquid at once. Pour in half, give it a good stir. Pour in another half. Make sure you stir well each time. We're looking for the mix to get nice and clumpy together. You can see it's still a little bit dry around the edges. So pour in some more. The reason why we've heated the milk up is that it just starts to activate the yeast a little bit quicker. You could make it with cold milk and a cold egg, but it would take a little bit longer to get going. It's almost done. I'm going to need a drop more for there. So I might need all of my liquid today. Different flours absorb different amounts of liquid, and if you've got the very strong flour, then you might find that you need even a little bit more liquid than what I've recommended here. So just keep going until it's come together into a ball. Once you've finished adding your milk and your egg mix, you should have a nice soft dough. It shouldn't be too sticky, and a nice clean bowl. I actually ended up using all of that liquid, so that was just about perfect for my dough. Next, we're going to knead it. Now, I always like to say that we're kneading for 2 songs. Choose your favourite song, which has got a good steady beat, to get some energy into your dough. Now, this is slightly tacky, and if your dough is slightly tacky like that, we'll just put a tiny little bit more flour onto the worktop. You don't want too much because you don't want to change the consistency of the dough, so just to stop it sticking. Kneading, if you haven't done it before, is pushing out and folding back, and pushing out and folding back, and you keep doing that. Like I like to do with 2 hands. You can do it with 1 hand if you want. You can do it with your knuckles if you prefer. I don't really like that. I find I end up with dough all over the back of my hand. So just make sure you've got a little bit of flour down so that you can start to really work the dough to stretch the gluten to make them become nice and soft and allow them to rise really nicely in the oven. Now, talking about the oven, I haven't mentioned yet the temperature you're going to need for your dough. So what you're going to have to do is have a nice warm area to leave your hot cross buns to rise. Now, you might, if you've got an Arga or something like that, or an airing cupboard, you can go and put your hot cross buns in there to rise. Or if, like me, you haven't got one of those options, you can turn your oven on to a lowish temperature, like about 140 degrees, and you can pop your hot cross buns on the tray into the oven on a low temperature and leave the door open, and that will replicate a nice warm environment. So I'm just going to carry on kneading this for what's approximately 2 songs. Okay, once you've kneaded for 2 good songs, about 5 or 6 minutes, your dough should be nice and warm. It should spring back when you press it with your finger. We're going to divide this into 6, which is not as easy as dividing into 8, but this is the best way. Cut it in half and then divide both of your halves into 3. And then I'm going to show you how to shape into some nice rounds, and then all we've got to do is leave this to rise and puff up in the heat. Right, so you take a ball of dough, flatten it with your hand, roll it around until you've got a nice smooth round shape. Okay, you can do it just in your hands like this if you prefer than on the table. A little bit like shaping plasticine balls. They don't need much more kneading. We're only really shaping. You can see there that one's slightly smaller. It's a bit annoying, but not the end of the world. If you've got a really big raisin or sultana poking out, I would push that in, because what tends to happen is when they cook in the oven, any that are on the outside end up sort of burning and becoming a little bit like cannonballs. So I would try and poke any big bits of fruit back into the mix. Try and get your tops of your buns nice and smooth, rather than with cracks and crinkles all over them. Into a nice smooth round shape like that. Okay, I would space them out so that they've got enough room to grow. And what we're going to do is we're going to leave them somewhere warm. In this case, for me, it's going to be in the oven with the door open. And we're going to wait for them to puff up to double their size. And they should get to double their size. It'll take, depending on where you've put them and how warm the area is, at least 10 minutes, possibly as long as half an hour. Once your hot cross buns have been rising and they're puffing up nicely, then you can get on with making the crosses. Now you might have a small piping bag at home that you can use, but if you haven't, I'm going to show you how to make your own. So take a piece of baking paper or greaseproof paper, and what we need first of all is a square. So if you fold into a triangle, that will give you an accurate square, and then just trim off these loose edges. Put your finger in this right opposite the point in the centre, pick up one end and twist it in your fingers and to join the other end, the middle point there. Next, you're going to pick it up and wrap the other side around and give it a little bit of a wiggle until you can get it into a nice point. That one seems to have just gone off slightly. There. Okay, so you should end up with a pointy end, and all of the ends of your paper together in the centre. Now you can keep adjusting how big or small the hole is by twisting it and sort of twizzling it. I would make it fairly well shut for now. The next thing to do is to fold those loose edges in, and you have a small piping bag. That's about the size you need. If you've got large piping bags, you could use those at home. You can also make a piping bag out of a food bag. Just use the corner of the food bag and cut the end off. Next, I'm going to fill this up with the sort of gluey mixture that makes the cross. Now that's just made with a tablespoon of plain flour. You can use the same strong flour that you used before, and probably 1 to 2 tablespoons of, actually I'm going to stir that with a teaspoon, 1 to 2 tablespoons of water. What you're looking for, you don't want clumpy this time, we want stringy. So add enough water to get the flour to mix into. That's a little bit too thick because we need to be able to pipe it, so I would add a little drop more water there. Now this mixture needs to be pipeable. I would say that is slightly too thick. So what you're looking for is for it to make sort of strands. It's starting to create a strand, but it's not quite there. So tiny drop more water to mix in. This is looking much more like it. Can you see how it's sort of spreading about? And it's creating a sort of a strandy, long strandy texture. That's what we're looking for piping the crosses. So then I'm just going to fill up my little piping bag with that mixture. Regardless of which sort of piping bag you're using, I would always push the piping mixture right down to the bottom and then fold in the edges and fold it down onto itself. Otherwise it tends to escape over the top. Then you've got to work out how big you want to be able to pipe. This is much too narrow, it's not coming out. So I'm going to snip off the end. I would test it on the worktop. That's about perfect. Now here are my hot cross buns. They've been puffing up for about half an hour in the warm oven. What I actually did in the end was I turned the oven off and I left them in there, and they've just risen gently on their own. How to pipe the cross: start at the bottom and sort of lay the piping mixture onto the top. Now it depends how big you want your crosses to be. I think this is probably quite a good size. I don't think I would have gone any bigger. Now, this is something I say often in class. I'm making this look easy. This isn't as easy to do as I'm making it look. So if you're starting to get frustrated and it's not coming out properly, you know, just persevere, keep going. If when you start piping your cross it's very, very runny, I would stop and add a little bit more flour to the mix and start again. You can see that this consistency is just about perfect. It's making strands that you can sort of lay over, and that's really what you're looking for. If it's too thick to pipe, I would try trimming a little bit more off the end of the piping bag to see if that helps. Now, these hot cross buns are going to go into the oven to bake. They'll be baking for probably only 10 minutes or so. They don't take too long to finish cooking in a hot oven at about 200 degrees. When your hot cross buns are in the oven, they're not going to take very long to cook, only about 10 minutes. So you can get on and make your glaze, which you're going to brush on when they come out. So you're going to need 2 tablespoons of sugar. I've used caster sugar because that will dissolve a little bit quicker. And then 2 tablespoons of water. And you're just going to warm them up on the hob until the sugar has dissolved. It'll only take a fraction of a time, a couple of moments. You'll know when your glaze is ready because it'll look almost completely clear and there'll be no grains of sugar left. When you get to that point and you've taken your hot cross buns out, they should be nice and brown on the top, and they should have a nice hollow sound when you tap the bottom. The crosses on here have stayed on pretty well. You can see how some of them have merged slightly with the bun itself. Then you need to give them a really good glaze. I always find that really they need probably 2 or 3 applications of glaze to make them really nice and shiny. Okay, so here we are. Beautifully glazed, well puffed up, well risen, and sounding nice and hollow with a good sized cross on the top. Those are your hot cross buns for Easter. Well done, everyone. So the second enriched dough recipe we're going to be doing is Chelsea Buns, and I'm going to be making a savoury version for this, but I will also put down below in the description box the ingredients for a sweet version. To make the basic dough, you will need strong flour or bread flour. You will need, that's 200 grams, 25 grams of butter or hard margarine. You're going to need 1 sachet of yeast, 1 teaspoon of sugar for the savoury version. If you're doing the sweet version, you will need to add 25 grams. You're going to need 65 millilitres of milk and whatever you want to add to flavour your Chelsea buns. I'm going to be flavouring mine with some grated cheese, some salami, and I'm going to add a little bit of spice with some cayenne pepper and some Tabasco. Did I mention the egg? There's also an egg going into this mix as well to enrich the dough. The equipment you will need are a mixing bowl, a measuring jug, a teaspoon, fork and table knife, a rolling pin and a cooling rack for later, and some sort of shallow tin. I'm using this, which I hope is going to be big enough. You can use a Swiss roll tin or even a flat baking tray with some baking paper. First, you're just going to rub your butter into the flour. It shouldn't take very long. It's only a small amount of butter that needs to be rubbed in. Once you've done that, I'm going to add the packet of yeast. Just going to add a teaspoon of sugar, or maybe even a little bit less than that, for the savoury version of the Chelsea buns. It just helps to activate the yeast. If you're doing a sweet version, you'll have more like a tablespoon, which is 25 grams. And the other things that go into here now, I'm going to add some salt and some cayenne pepper. I can open it. Oh, there we are. Just careful, it is quite hot, but I do want mine to be a little bit spicy today. Once you've got your dry ingredients in, just give it a little stir lightly with your table knife. And then what we're going to do is add the milk and the egg. Now, I've just warmed this milk up in the microwave for 30 seconds. It won't take longer than that. We're just going to get it to blood temperature, so it should be comfortable on your finger. You can do it in a saucepan if you prefer. Add the egg straight into that. Make sure that your milk isn't boiling, because otherwise you'll scramble your egg. You only want your milk to be warm. So add your milk in there, give it a good stir, and then we're going to add the milk to our dough. Don't forget, whenever you're making any sort of dough, never pour all of the liquid in one go. Always start off with half of your liquid. Give it a really good stir. We're waiting for it to go clumpy. I'm going to add another half of my remaining liquid. Give it another really good stir. You can see it's going nice and clumpy, but I've still got some dry areas. So I'm going to add a drop more. I may need all of the liquid, I may not. Every type of flour absorbs different amounts of liquid, so just go gently and keep on giving it a really good stir each time you add more liquid to the bowl. I'm just going to add a tiny drop more because I'm a little bit dry in that corner, and then I think that's probably enough. What you're looking for is a nice soft dough that comes together easily but isn't too sticky. This dough needs to be rolled out. So there we are, you can see it's all come together really nicely into a ball, and I'm just going to take that out and it should leave the bowl looking nice and clean. Okay, once you've got your ball of dough, then we're going to knead for, how I like to say, is 2 songs or about 5 or 6 minutes. So put on a song with a really good kneading beat and knead for about 5 or 6 minutes. If you're not sure how to knead, you're pushing out the dough, folding it back on itself and pushing it out again, and you keep on doing that. I like to knead with 2 hands. You can knead just with 1 hand if you prefer, or with your knuckles, but that's the way I like to do it. So knead for about 5 minutes, or like I say, 2 good songs, and give it plenty of energy to stretch the gluten in the dough. Once your dough has been well kneaded, it should spring back, it should be nice and soft and warm. You will need to scatter a little bit of flour out because we are rolling this. It's a little bit like the pizza scone wells we did in year 7. You're going to roll it into a rectangle. So always roll and turn to make sure you're not getting stuck to the table. Your dough will be springing back because you've stretched the gluten, and it will be springing backwards and forwards as you roll it. So this rolling might take you a little bit longer than it would if you were rolling pastry, because pastry doesn't spring back in quite the same way. Okay, once you've rolled out your dough into a squarish shape, if you can't get it square, you can pull it at the ends and the sides to get the sort of shape that you want. You need it to be fairly even and fairly squarish if you can get it that way. Then just scatter your toppings on. I have cut my salami up a little bit because actually it's quite difficult to cut if it's in great big pieces, flat pieces, so it's better to cut it up a little bit. I'm also going to add some grated cheese and a little bit of Tabasco, just because I'm going for a spicy, slightly hot, not hot cross bun, slightly hot Chelsea bun today. If you were doing a sweet version, you would be adding your dried fruit and your spice, or you could add things like grated apple and things like that. If you are going to add grated apple, I would suggest you squeeze out any excess juice first, but you can really put whatever flavouring you like on here. It's entirely up to you. I've used a whole little packet of salami here that I've broken up. I'm going to add some cheese. Try and get your toppings so that they're going over the whole of your dough and right to the edges as well. And then I'm just going to squirt on a little bit of extra hot. Next we're going to roll it up. I like to roll in front of me, so push up a little wall here. If you're stuck to the table at this point, I would get a palette knife and slide it underneath. So push up a little wall, and then you're going to just curl over that little wall and roll up. So you've got a nice even roll. Okay, so if at this point you're sort of angled, so you've got a rounded edge, just sort of stretch it out. You want it to be an even shape. You want it to be an even thickness all the way along. Okay, now for the size tin I've got, I'm going to try and get 9. It's not an easy thing to do necessarily, so gauge how far you're going to cut along. I'm only getting 9 because that's going to work nicely 3 by 3. If you've got a different size tin, then you might want to do 8, 2 by 4 or something like that. So it's entirely up to you. I'm just going to hope that I've got this sort of right. No, I think I've got 8. How annoying. Never mind. Your end pieces, always the exterior swirl, put those 2 end pieces exterior swirl side down, okay? And then it doesn't matter with the others because they're going to look exactly the same. Then you're just going to put your Chelsea buns, your little whirls, if you like, into your dish. And this is where I would have liked to have had 9, but actually I don't think it's going to matter. What I'll do is I'll put 2 of the bigger ones in the middle, and they will probably spread out really nicely to fill the whole of the tin anyway. You can give them a little bit of a squash to help them move in the right direction, and then those are going to go into a warm place to rise up. If any bits have fallen out, I would just poke them back in. So you can either put these into an oven that you've turned on at 140, which is a low temperature and will make it nice and warm for them to rise, or you could leave them in an airing cupboard or on top of an Agra or something like that for about anywhere between 10 minutes and half an hour, depending how long it takes for them to double up in size. For a Chelsea bun, what we really want is for all of the edges to merge together, and so you end up with one big mass. These Chelsea buns have been puffing up for about 20 minutes now, and you can see that they've really pushed together in that tin. So now it's time to bake them. They'll only be in the oven for about 10 minutes. So you need to turn the oven up to 200 degrees. Here are the savoury Chelsea buns that I've made. Now, they've been cooking for about 10 minutes. They don't take very long. They have gone really nicely golden brown. And the savoury ones don't need anything else doing to them now. If you've made the sweet version, you'll need to brush them with a sugar and water glaze, just like I did with the hot cross buns. So you might want to look at how I did that for that recipe. For these ones, I'm just going to tap them out and put them onto a plate. Just before you do that, if you haven't used baking paper like I haven't, just make sure that you've managed to release your Chelsea buns all the way around the edge. And be careful because the tins are hot. My tin is hot anyway. And here we are. This one's got just left behind. Okay, I'll talk to you about this one, seeing as it got left behind. So you can see they're golden brown on the top and they're golden on the sides where they were against the tin. They'll be nice and fluffy and light on the inside where they were attached to each other. They should be golden brown on the bottom, and we're going to give them a tap and they sound nice and hollow like a little drum. So that's your Chelsea buns. Well done.